There's just so much more to hear.
Download our podcasts at DubaiI1038.com.
We've talked long and hard on the show about Saudi Arabia and its massive project spend ahead. $500 billion alone on the new Neom city, plus spend on rail, metro, tourist infrastructure, industrial cities, etc. Plus the massive social change that's going on there. Women being allowed to drive and cinemas opening. The whole social infrastructure is changing. The spend is going to need about, trillions of dollars really to make it all happen. And now the IMF has warned Saudi Arabia about the scale of its spending, and with an oil price hovering around $80 a barrel, is it going to be enough? With us to look at Saudi spending and revenue is Andrew Roscoe, Power and Water Editor of MEED magazine and
good morning
website. Good morning to you. Saudi obviously has tremendous wealth under its feet. Is the question simply one of cash flow?
Yes, I think that the key issue now, with oil price going up, reaching $80 a barrel recently, Saudi Arabia needs to continue with its reforms, and it needs to ensure that it doesn't delay reforms and it resists the temptation to go back to government spending.
When you say reforms, what do you mean specifically?
So they're undertaking the Vision 2030 economic reform plan just now, which is overarching massive economic master plan. And these reforms, various energy areas of the economy, the main one privatising large swathes of the economy, building projects using the private sector, diversifying the economy, creating jobs, and also on the energy side, removing energy subsidies and removing subsidies on electricity and water.
I mean, we saw many businessmen being locked up by MBS in Riyadh a few months ago as well. Do you sort of see, when you say reforms, that sort of corruption is a big issue in Saudi?
Well, I think, reforms, it's not just economic reforms. You've got social reforms on the other hand. And you've also got the crackdown on corruption. I think shows that through Mohammed bin Salman, they're trying to get Saudi Arabia, build it up as a place to do business, so international investors feel comfortable and more confident in going into the kingdom.
Well, I mean, the Saudi Aramco IPO obviously could raise quite a substantial sum, and the country has huge current oil outflows. They can raise capital on debt markets. MBS obviously thinks Saudi can do it. The big question is whether it will have to be scaled back. Do you think they'll be able to raise enough money to pay for Neom and all of the other projects, or will they have to scale back?
I think it depends on getting the financing from abroad, international investment.
And do you think that's possible?
Well, yeah, as part of the 2030 vision, the target is to increase foreign direct investment from 3.8% to 5.7% and increase the role of the private sector in the economy from 40% to 65%. And to do this, they need to, make sure the international community is confident about investing in Saudi Arabia. Part of their reforms as well is improving their capital market structure. So earlier this year, they were included on the FTSE Russell secondary emerging markets, and in June they're going to be assessed for being included in the MSCI capital index.
Well, I'm wondering whether you're saying the international markets more because perhaps the locking up of private businessmen has maybe sort of alienated the government from potential PPP finance raising. Therefore, they need to look outside. Do you think that there's going to be less PPP as a result of that?
No, I think there'll be more. I mean, a lot of the PPP financing would come from abroad anyway, from regional international investors. And I think that's going to be the key. PPP projects this year, and also privatisation of state companies. And we saw in April, quite a significant development is the launch of the roadmap delivery programme for the privatisation programme. And that sets out three key areas for development by 2020. That includes the privatisation of 5 state entities, corporatisation of 4, and also 14 PPP projects by 2020. It's very ambitious, but it does show that they're sort of committed to seeing this through.
I'm really interested in the IMF's comments. I mean, obviously journalists like to call it a warning, but it's not unusual for the IMF to make recommendations in public papers as to what countries could do next. But the warning that Saudi Arabia has to resist the temptation to increase its spending just because the oil price, apart from this weekend, has been rising. Tell us about their temptation. What's the social pressure like in Saudi Arabia to increase that spending?
Well, there's definitely been some social pressure there. I think we've seen this on a couple of times. Last year, King Salman restored bonuses for state employees after they'd been removed. That was due to some social pressure. And earlier this year, they put up the price of electricity and water for local citizens, and that was followed shortly by the introduction of the Citizens Account. And that is an account to help lower-income Saudis with the cost of rising costs of electricity and water, and also the implementation of VAT, which was implemented in January.
And there was a spike in spending, 18% in the first quarter of this year, and it was largely, as you say, going into the citizens' accounts. To play devil's advocate, though, doesn't reform and diversity and everything that Saudi Arabia is doing at the moment, doesn't it cost money to implement as well as save it?
I think that's a key point. If we look at the Saudi economy last year, it actually contracted for the first time since 2009, and part of the reason was lower government spending. And IMF did warn Saudi Arabia last year, which seems to have taken these warnings, that reform's good, but you need to sort of stage it, and you can't be too dramatic. So they sort of softened the fiscal balance programme. So now they're aiming for a balanced budget by 2023 instead of 2019 on the IMF's recommendation, because to ensure the economy keeps growing, you need capital investment, and particularly with this investment programme, the 2030 vision, you need government investment in infrastructure to get that programme started. Saudi
Aramco IPO is going to raise a lot of money. Do you think there's any way that they might expand the offering? I mean, it's not particularly clear what's going to be involved in the IPO yet, but perhaps to include some of the upstream business, maybe some of the oil under Saudi's feet, if they need to raise more money.
Well, I think they need to get the first one done first, and I think it'll depend on how that goes, what the interest is like from the market, what sort of valuation and price they get. As we heard this morning, or from yesterday, it'll be 2019 now for the IPO of the first 5%. We haven't had any further details yet, so I think now we'll just wait and see how that one goes first.
We talk about the massive power demand from an increasing population in Saudi as well. I mean, we've got so much oil under the feet. When we talk about alternative power, especially solar, do you think that's going to be able to contribute in any real meaningful way in Saudi Arabia?
Sure. The Renewable Energy Programme is a massive programme, and again, fitting into the 2030 vision, it's going to be financed by the private sector. They'll all be PPP projects where you get international developers in to build the infrastructure, and it's part of the Saudi plan to reduce dependence on oil for power production. So they're currently burning about 800,000 barrels of oil a day for power production. So that oil can be, much better used on the export market.
Because I do wonder with PPP projects, especially in power, people tend to end up paying a lot more for power than they would have done if it was just government controlled.
Well, that's what some people...
Is that what commonly happens?
That's sort of what some people say, and that was what they used to think in the region. But I think now we're seeing the wholesale shift. And if you get a private company in to build the infrastructure, they'll ensure it's more efficient, and they should get the lowest cost possible for power. And obviously it removes the burden of capital expenditure, which is, a priority for Saudi now.
Andrew, thanks very much for joining us. Andrew Roscoe, Power and Water Editor at MEED. We do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's just so much more to hear.
Download our podcasts at DubaiEye1038.com.